Well, good evening or good afternoon, depending on what part of the country you are watching us from. Welcome to this episode number 7 of EV Society's Canada Talks Electric Cars webinar. You probably know that we hold this webinar on the first Tuesday of every month. You can put it in your calendar ahead of time. We'll be here. My name is Tim Burrows, and I'll be moderating the webinar for today. Electric Vehicle Society is familiar to most of you, I know, because many of you are members who come each month to watch the webinar. But I also know we have a number of folks who are not part of EV Society who are here tonight. And so for their sake, I'll let you know that EV Society is a national organization, and we exist really to come together as one body and sort of promote electric cars and help advance electrification through sharing our experience and also through advocacy. If you decide that you would like to join EV Society, you would be most welcome to do it. It's free as an associate member, but if you saw your way clear to become a full member, it's only $30 a year. And if you happen to have the same color hair as I have, and you're a senior, it's only $20 a year. So please visit evsociety.ca and look for the chapter meetings and see if there's one that's convenient for you. You'd be welcome to come. They're casual, they're fun, they're informative, and we'd love to see you there. So this should tell you that this webinar is being recorded, so you'll be able to watch it later or share it with friends. The webinar won't last any longer than 60 minutes. We're strict about that. And all of you have joined with your microphones muted and your cameras turned off, so it's private at your end. You're going to be able to ask our guest speaker questions at any time, but we ask that you use that Q&A button, not the chat button, and I'll explain why in a minute. Once we get through the Q&A, or the speaker is finished speaking, Laura Bryson has volunteered to ask questions and take you through those questions and with some great answers from our guest. When you're submitting those questions through the Q&A button, just take a look and you'll see that you'll be able to give it a thumbs up. And if you do that, a question gets a thumbs up, it moves it higher up in the list of questions, and that'll make life a lot easier for Laura to prioritize, especially if we're running short on time. Today's webinar is called Power Sharing Solutions for Condos and Multi-Unit Buildings. And before I formally introduce Mark, our guest speaker, he's asked me if I would launch a short poll just to give him an idea about who is in the room tonight. So I'm going to do that, and I'm going to ask you, if you wouldn't mind, just take a look at this. And when you have an answer in mind, if you would just click on it and then hit the submit. And I'll just leave that for a minute or two. And I think we're doing pretty well. We're up to 90% of the room have voted. So I'm going to end it here, and I'm going to flip it around and share the results. You can all see we have a good number of folks living in condominiums. So about half the room are in single family homes. You might not be there forever, so this could still be important to you, this information. About a third of you live in a condominium. And we have some in rented homes, condos, or apartments. And 3% know that they, or at least they anticipate that they'll be moving into a condo in the future. So certainly for them, this is important. So there we go, Mark. I'm going to leave that for you to digest while we go forward. Let me just close that up. So, Mark. My great pleasure to introduce Mark Marmer. Mark is a master electrician with 45 years of experience, and he's owner of Signature Electric. Signature Electric has been in business for over 30 years and specializes in service to condominiums. Over the past 7 years, Mark has developed a division that focuses on installing electric vehicle chargers in all types of settings, including single-family residences, businesses, and retail locations, and of course, condominiums. The Signature Electric family owns 4 electric vehicles, wow, including an original Tesla Roadster. You owe me a ride at some point. A Nissan Leaf, a Tesla Model S, and a Tesla Model 3. Mark, welcome to EV Society and the Canada Talks December webinar. So,
Good to see you.
yeah, it's great to see you.
Just to be clear, the Roadster belongs to Clyde, who works on our team, so you're going to have to put that through to him. I haven't had a ride yet, but
okay.
I'm sure it could happen if I ask. It doesn't look like I can fit in the car. That's the problem.
Okay, well, we'll have to work on that. That'll be an objective for us anyway. I'd love to. I could get into it. I'm not sure I could get out of it again. That's the problem.
Maybe that was the point.
Well, the talk is certainly on point. There are a lot of people I know are curious about this question about how we charge in condos and in MURBs, right? Multi-unit residential buildings. It's one of those sort of top 10 questions that if you own an electric car, you find people asking because they're either in a condo or they're thinking about it and thinking about electric cars. So I'm going to turn everything over to you and let you have at it.
That's great. Thanks very much. So it was good to see pretty much what I expected. A lot of us are living in single family homes. When we're in a single family home, we make all the choices. We decide how things are going to be. When we have to move into a condo, suddenly we have to deal now with a board of directors, and we don't get as easily to be able to choose. And since most of us know that home charging is very important at the moment to make the electric vehicle experience functional, it's really helpful if we can figure out how to get home charging in. So we do a lot of assistance with this type of thing. What I'm going to do today is give you a little peek behind the curtain. This is really the way that we talk to boards and that we talk to property managers. So I'll give it to you, and I'll explain it a little bit if I can from the perspective of the owner, because I think we have a lot of owners who are interested in understanding this. So in terms of what we're going to look at, we're going to just look at what a network charging solution. We're looking at a future-focused solution that's going to serve the whole community. You've got to keep in mind the boards, unlike the individual person, the boards are interested in what's going to happen for the whole community. That's what they're charged with. And of course, the property manager, the same thing. So what kind of benefits are we going to have? How's the system going to work? Planning ahead for some kind of adoption of EVs. A couple of things that are community and personal charging, and I'll get into that, what that means. A lot of our audience is well educated and has a pretty good idea about that. And power management, that's a really important aspect to it. And when I talk about this, when it says charging policy, really what we'd like to do is get these condos to a point where you simply come to the office and say, I'd like to have an EV charger, and they hand you a piece of paper and say, this is our policy, simply follow it, and you don't have to jump through a million hoops. So a lot of them are heading in that direction. We're getting way more boards with way more open attitudes now than there used to be. I think part of it's just a matter of the fact that we have more cars on the road. And when I talk to any board, they want to know something about what things cost. So I got to give them something to grab onto where they don't feel they got value. So we'll get to that towards the end. So what I usually talk about is it's kind of what we used to do, right? Maybe put in 1 meter for somebody with a charger and try to figure out how to connect it to their individual meters. Sometimes these things simply just either weren't practical or they didn't scale up for the future. And some of them were dangerous. We just couldn't have extension cords on the floors in the garage, and it just really wasn't functional. So I just want to, say let's move past what we were doing a few years ago, sort of swatting at flies and trying to get, the one or two cars that I see. Now we're getting 13, 14, 15 cars in a condo. This is simply just not a workable situation. What I wanted to do was give an overview of what the system looks like, because sometimes I felt that I got through the whole thing and there were so many pieces that you couldn't quite figure out where it came from. So we have like these 3 pieces. This is the infrastructure. So this is the switches and transformers that the condo is probably going to pay for initially. And we'll figure out the size and where those are going to go based on the layout of the garage and where the cars are parked. The idea of these panels are put in for the whole community, so they have to be enough of them to manage everybody, because it's for everybody. So we put use just a standard panel, and that's how we get started with the corporation piece. The next piece is sort of this networked electric vehicle charger. So this would be where the resident would come in. They would purchase this charger and connect it up. In this case, we're not using sort of a typical $700 or $800 home charger. We're probably twice that cost, but this is a charger that's able to communicate with the internet that the resident's going to pay for. And the reason we do that is to have things that I'm going to talk about: third-party billing, tap card authentication, and power sharing, which I mentioned earlier on, and I'll get back to. And then the whole thing is combined with cloud-based billing and control software. So we have Laura Bryson with us today who's going to help with those questions. She works for, she's an owner in the company called Switch, and they're one of these third parties that we use that takes care of all the third-party billing, and it takes this hands off away from the managers and boards. They ultimately, when this gets installed, they don't want to look for extra work. They don't want this to be a burden on them. So how can we move this so that somebody else is taking care of it? And this control is happening at the software end in communication with the charger. So this is sort of a bit of an overview to look at. So we talk about why would we do this? What are the benefits here? So clearly, one of the main benefits is maybe you as a resident has asked for it. These residents are owners, and they're entitled to be accommodated and cared for. And if we can figure out a way to manage this and come up with a solution, then we serve the residents. That's what the actual board and manager, that's their job. But the other thing is that we look at this sort of raising the ship for everybody. If we have something that's adding value to the building, whether we're putting in EV chargers or we're beautifying the front lobby, everything raises a value for everybody. It means that somebody wanting to move into the building from the outside would say, well, if I could have EV charging, I would see that as being an advantage. So even somebody who doesn't put the EV charger in, but the building is ready for it, this would add value. So it's adding value for everybody and maybe increasing the property value. So we try to talk about that when we're doing this, and people are beginning to get the idea. Sometimes the boards talk to me about it. They understand it before I got there. That's a new experience that I hadn't had until maybe about a year ago. And the same thing we're talking about when we say differentiate, we could have literally two sister buildings side by side that look exactly the same. This is not an uncommon situation. You can imagine if one of those buildings accommodated EV charging, and sometimes the garage is underneath the building is only, there's no delineation. It just stops where the red on this side and green on that side. Imagine that people looking over to the other side of the garage realize that these people have EV charging. Would that add value to the building? It could very well. And keeping up with emerging laws. So the Condo Act changed a few years ago. At least we're talking about, at least in Ontario. And we ended up with a situation where if you presented a specific request in a specific manner and sent it to the board, they had 60 days to answer you, and the answer really couldn't be no. Now, they didn't have to accommodate you the way you asked to be accommodated. They could come up with an alternative. But before that, and before this Condo Act changed, literally there was no teeth. There was nothing they could do. If the board said no and I'm not interested, then that was the end of the discussion, and there was nothing they can do. This is not a perfect situation, but it's way better, and it changed the whole landscape almost overnight in terms of making our job much easier. And with the combination of that and the cars actually appearing on the road, I think that's what's really changed things. Thank the Model 3 for that. So this is very almost inevitably the first question I get. They want to know how many chargers can they put in the building. And this is a really good question because the reality is most times they can't manage. They don't have enough electricity for all these 300 parking spaces that they have. So how do we figure that out? So over the years, buildings have done things to save energy. And so maybe there's energy available now. So we do what's called a load evaluation. Again, this is, this is at a more high level that the manager and the board seeing this. And we'll go in and actually take a look at the size of the service and take a snapshot for the last year of how much energy the building has used. And then I know how much is left over. And then I can start to calculate from that amount to give you a realistic idea of how many vehicles we can actually accommodate. And this is, we do these, I would tell you that we do these by the hundreds, and we use an outside engineer to do them. And it's a very, very common thing. We do them all the time. So we were talking again before about the idea of, can I just reject this this request? And this is kind of pretty much what it says. If it's going to cause some kind of contrary to the electrical code or adversely affect the structural integrity of the property. So you can imagine this is a pretty high bar to get over. Most of the cases, you'd have a hard time convincing somebody that what you're going to do is going to cause some damage. What effort have you made to make it happen? So, and 60 days in the life of a board is not a long time. Things don't move very fast that way. So a lot of times we're trying to get them to do this work up ahead of time, not wait till they're kind of up against the ropes with somebody wanting an answer in 60 days. Figure it out ahead of time so that by the time somebody comes, we can just welcome them with a clear answer, and we're already moving forward, or we're already ready to move forward. So we talked earlier in the intro about community charging. So again, this is not quite as common as it used to be. You can imagine when they didn't think there were really going to be very many electric cars, if I could just put one or two chargers in a spare space into a visitor's parking area and whatever, that might be a perfect idea, and that'll solve the problem, and the person will be accommodated. So it's possible. We have a couple of installations like this. They don't make up the majority of them, but so we want to talk about what could be the advantages of that. So it's not as expensive to install. We're only putting a couple of chargers. We can put them near the electrical room, so the run to get the electrical out there isn't as far, so that keeps the cost down. Again, we're using the exact same system we would if we put it into a deeded parking space. We're still going to measure and bill for different people, depending on whether they're, as each person comes up, we'll be able to identify them, and we'll be able to build them and keep track of what energy they've used. We could, if we wanted to, have wait lists and notifications and things of that nature. If we want to discuss it afterwards, it's not an ideal arrangement in a condo. Keep in mind, these are people that live there, so they come home and they're probably not wanting to come up and down, but functionally it's possible to do. And because we're going to use power management, which we'll talk about a little further into the presentation, we're able to scale these up. So, and there would be a mobile app usually to go with these. A lot of our drivers are familiar with all kinds of different mobile apps. There could be one specifically for this charging arrangement. And it's a lot like we see in some of our cars. This is future-proofed as well. If we have to do an upgrade or a change or a request comes, we do get these from time to time. Could have the chargers do this or that, or I'd like to share them this way or that way. Because we have a back-end control, we have the possibility to do these kind of upgrades because we're network connected to them. The challenges of network charging, and the reason I'm showing these two chargers is, I think most of us, these are both 32 amp chargers with 40 amp inputs. They're just a different manufacturer, a slightly different setup. But I want people to be aware that there are other choices. They're not just one kind of charger, and functionally these could do very similar things. So the problem of community charging is that we need reliability. We need to know that when I come home, a charger is going to be available. I'm going to use this. I need this for my commute the next day. And if the charger's tied up, how am I going to manage to get in? If there's only one or two, but there were 3 or 4 cars, this could become a problem. And that's just what I just explained to you. They want to come home, they want to be ready, and they certainly, I wouldn't imagine that residents have any interest whatsoever in shifting their cars around at night. And I will tell you that this used to be quite a little education, getting this information out, and now they've almost got this figured. First of all, they've watched the videos, they've already seen a bunch of stuff, and by the time I get to the table, they've already told me they're not interested in this. So this makes it much easier for me. I can move along to what I would hope that they're going to do, which is charging in your own deeded space. Charging in your own deeded space is very much like the 55% of the people that we have at home, that live at home from our audience. They come home, just like I do. I plug in my car. I know it's going to be there. It's available, and I'll unplug it in the morning. And that's all the interaction I want to have. And I don't have to worry about somebody else using it or sharing it, or wondering if it's going to be available, or worrying on the way home if I'm going to have enough. This is what we will do. So this is the goal of most of our installations. This is where we want to end up. So in terms of these network chargers, the residents, I mentioned it before, the resident's going to purchase and install the charger in their own deeded space. So keep in mind, I'm speaking to a board, so I'm explaining to them that part of this is their responsibility and part's going to be the owner. So we're now talking a little bit about, I'm explaining to you that the owner is going to do this, that the residents control access. So if you notice on this unit, there's a little place to tap a card. So we can issue an RFID card, or we could use an RFID from the building, tap it. So if somebody else parked in your space and went to use your charger, that it wouldn't work. You need this authentication in order to make the charger work. I think a lot of us that are EV owners just see this as an extra unnecessary step, but I will tell you that most people, seems extremely important to them. That's somehow going to be secure, and that somebody else isn't going to plug into their charger. But this just comes with time and education, I think. There is a fee, so obviously the people that do this, whether it's Switch or somebody else that does this billing, they need to make a living. They need to get paid to provide this service, and that's how we do. We do it through a monthly service fee that the residents pay. The idea being that the station supplier would charge the person. So if you use the charger for an hour and we agreed $1 an hour was right, and that sometimes is in that general range, then they would be billed for $1. That dollar would be held and returned to the corporation on some kind of quarterly basis, because the energy that's being used here actually doesn't belong typically to the homeowner. It belongs to the whole building and has to be returned. So everything it's very important. This is a very touchy point with the boards, and it's very important that whatever was theirs needs to be returned, and they have to be confident that it's working well. Again, we talked about scaling to future demand. So we're going to talk a bit about power management and how we're going to charge more cars for the same amount of energy. So these chargers are able to do that. This is the reason that we're using a network charger as opposed to putting in a series of residential chargers. So how are we going to supply the power to these? We talked a little, if you listen, we talked a little bit about at the beginning. There's some panels that need to be installed because there was nowhere to feed these chargers from originally. Most existing buildings didn't plan for it. New buildings, I will tell you, are planning. We are in touch with new buildings all the time. We have a variety of them on stream, and the builders are becoming much more aware of this. They're happy to put these in, believe it or not. For the most part, they see the demand, and they want to figure out what they have to do with their infrastructure as they're building the building, because it's a lot easier and less expensive to do this as they build the building than trying to fit it in, shoehorn it in afterwards. We can do it, but it would be great if it's well thought out ahead of time. And builders, every single time as a builder does the next building, I'm finding the next building's a bit better than the last one was. So I'm going on, but power management. So power management is part of this software, part of the same thing that Switch would be providing. And we're looking for a way to use an algorithm and to intelligently share the energy. I don't know if any of you have, I have 2 cars at home. So I have two Teslas and we share the two chargers with one feed. So that would be considered a 2-to-1 ratio. This is exactly the same thing on a much grander scale. The chargers are talk to each other. In the case of my house, they're talking to each other by a piece of wire from my second generation chargers, but these will be talking through the software. And we'll try to have twice as many. So if I can illustrate that, if we had these two cars to charge at the same time, we might be able to literally find an existing panel. We can do this sometimes, and just put a couple of 40 amp breakers in there and charge these two cars. And that might work perfectly fine. And that means we don't have any infrastructure. But what are we going to do if we have more than two drivers? Now it looks like we don't have room in that panel anymore. Now we're going to have to put in one or two or more panels depending on the size of the building and the layout. So the question is how big the panel has to be, and how many chargers we can connect to every panel. This piece is very important to boards. They are very concerned about cost. How much is everything going to cost? So we're looking for a way to share this and have maybe the same panel that would have originally done a certain amount of cars to be able to do more. That means we don't have to put in as many panels, and that keeps the cost down. And we only have so much electricity to go around anyways. So how can we share it in a better way between everyone? So this is exactly how it works here. These are the size of panels we normally put in. They're 3-phase 200 amp panels. This isn't exactly the 200 amp panel you have in your home. Your home is single phase. It's a 3-phase, so it's a bit more power. But if I were to put this in and I started to put home chargers on these with 40 amp breakers, when I reached about 8 chargers, the Electrical Safety Authority could do a calculation and say that's as many chargers as I think this panel can handle. And because it's possible for all these chargers to come on at one time, and I don't want to blow the fuse ahead of this panel. So that's a pretty big panel to only serve 8 cars. So if I could put power management in, and I could have an algorithm that could talk and watch all these and think about, I've got all night to charge the cars. Some cars are there, some cars are not there. Some people have their battery is quite depleted, and other ones are not as much. How can I take advantage of this and have more? So in this case, we would have 16, could even stretch to 20. We can actually see live information as we're doing this, and then we can judge that as we move forward. So this is a really big value add for everybody. And as you're thinking through this, understand that while it might be great for you if somebody would just put a breaker in a panel and put in one charger, they need to be thinking about this in terms of the whole community and the reality of what's available at the condominium itself and the costs involved, right? So I'm constantly, by the time we've reached this part of the presentation, they've heard about energy management at least 3 times because it's just critically important. And again, it's a bit of a concept to understand, but I will tell you that most of them are getting the idea, the information is out there, and they're understanding what needs to be done. So what the goal will be here is to have I mentioned it earlier, if we can just have like a policy in place, this is what we should be working from. And that's why I mentioned that at the beginning and I moved through. I want the condo to be thinking about that policy because that'll be the information that you'll have when you come. It would be great if they could just figure this out before you came. You won't have to jump through a million hoops. You won't have to follow everything that the condo asks for. You won't be making drawings and you won't be making submissions. You can just follow whatever the rules are and move forward. That's a much easier way for you to manage. When I talk to the boards, I caution them. They a lot of times have they have somebody already. A lot of times they're thinking ahead, but I would say 75% of the time, somebody's already asked for the charger and they're needing to react. And they're a little nervous about the time frame, and of course they're wanting to serve this person. So they want to see how they what can I do? What can I do for this person right now? And I caution them to look not to how they're going to handle the first charger, but how they're going to handle the 10th charger, and handle the same thing in the same way. Because if you figure something out, and I just put a home charger in for this first person, when the second and third come and it doesn't work anymore, you're going to have tension, because and appreciate it from the other side. You're going to have tension because you've done something in a particular way at a particular cost for an individual, and everybody else is going to want it the same way. And if you can't accommodate it, then maybe you should have just taken a breath, figured it all out, and tried to figure out how you're accommodating further down the road. I want your eye to be towards the end of this, not just at the beginning. The other temptation is to say, well, you know what, I can just do a little calculation, and I can figure out if I did this, instead of having all this billing and complexity to it, what seems like complexity to it, I'll just charge, I don't know, $25 a month. We'll have an agreement with Joe in Suite 402. He says that he can live with $25 a month. I spoke to the board. They're good with it. And we'll just move forward that way. And it'll just be so much simpler. And they'll just give us a check, and we'll cash the check once a year. Everybody will be happy, and it will be way less expensive. And we can maybe use a home charger or something for that. I've been doing condos for probably over 20 years. I am telling you that there will come a point where this will be a problem. Either the person who's charging will feel that they're being taken advantage of and they're asking for too much money, or somebody on the condo board, whether this condo board or 2 condo boards from now, will come back and think that the condo is getting the short end of the stick. And this conversation, once this starts, will go on forever until we put a meter in. So, and then the problem will stop. And it's the only way the problem will stop. If that's the case, let's put the meter in at the beginning. There's no physical meter, but let's put some kind of measurement in at the beginning so that we don't run into this problem. So, to not have flat fees. And again, let's optimize everything that we have. We only have so much energy in the building. We only have so much space for these panels. They all cost money. Let's figure out how we can take advantage of this sort of long 10 or 12-hour overnight opportunity to charge these cars and to keep the cost down. Keep in mind, this is the cost for everybody. It's not just, once this gets put in, somehow or other, somebody's paying for it, whether the residents are paying for a piece of it or the owners are paying for all of it. However it is, everything that happens in a condo is ultimately paid for by the owners. That's the people who live in the suites. So it should be just as important to them as it is to the boards and to the managers. So I always promise that I'll talk about costs, and we showed this slide with these things around the other way. So if this isn't really a true side-by-side comparison, because of course the EV charger on the right is not a single charger, it's a dual charger, and it's a much more complex, more typically public charger. That being said, we do have one of these in a condo downtown on Queens Quay. So it is possible to have this in a condo. So this is an option. This more under $2,000, there's a variety of chargers in that range that are available. This is more common, and you can see that the charger itself is a little more compact. Sometimes space is an issue in these parking spaces, so having something a little more slim works well. And of course, we want to keep the cost down to the individuals so that they don't have too high of an expense either. So we're looking at it from both perspectives. But ultimately, both of these chargers can communicate with the internet. They can be power shared. They can be they can be changed in terms of the current. We can charge for cost, for billing. We can have authentication. It happens in essence, it happens exactly the same with both of these chargers. Property managers are very concerned about not being given extra work. They feel that they're busy enough as it is, and if it turns out that part of their job becomes reading meters and sending out bills and doing collections, they're not the least bit happy about it, and frankly speaking, the boards don't really want them doing this anyways. So we're looking to provide a very hands-off approach so that really the responsibility, once everything's put in, everything goes back to the way it was. Everybody just does what their job was, and it's the responsibility of somebody else to deal with the billing and collection and management. The chargers belong to the owners; they don't belong to the corporation. They're carried with what's called a Section 98, so they become part of the owner's suite and their there's parking space. When they sell it, this asset will go with it. So this is very important, and you can imagine I put this up. This is very appealing slide to the property managers. So I find by this time I've said so much to the managers that they need a little refresh. So okay, you said 100 things to me, Mark. How am I going to do this? What am I going to do first? So we talked way at the beginning about a load evaluation. Remember, that's how many chargers can we have in a building? So we're going to do that with this load sharing that we have. Maybe they're still interested. Maybe they want to see what the cost of a community charger is. It's fine. Once they've engaged with us, whatever information they need, we're going to supply that information and move through to get whatever they need to help make this decision. I will tell you that this doesn't typically happen very quickly. It's sometimes from the first time we meet a board, it could be a year before we're actually putting in chargers. It just takes a while for them to figure it out. It's a big expenditure. It's a big learning curve for them. Most of them don't have electric vehicles. They don't drive it. They don't understand sometimes the basics. That being said, you'll see that when I'm doing this, I'm not talking about promoting electric vehicles. I'm just talking about a solution for something that is actually existing and that they need education on. Whether they think electric vehicles are going to take off or not is frankly not relevant to me. If the conversation goes in that direction, I don't mind giving my opinion, but it doesn't form part of this presentation. So we're going to do that. We're going to get pricing for infrastructure to put them in the deeded spaces. This is our preference. This represents about, I don't know, 98% of the installations that we have are these in the deeded spaces, and this is really the direction that people are going. And maybe we'll get a price for an individual charger. That's the piece. So when we give the price, we're giving the price for the condo. That's the panels and communication bit and what have you. And then they're wanting to see, well, what does it look like when an owner will come to me? How much will they pay? What will they be? So they'll usually get these two individual things so they can see how much that cost. And again, I asked them to start thinking about, again, this charging policy. If they can come up with this charging policy, even if they're not going to do it, even if they're not ready. I had somebody just the other day. We had somebody asking, and now the guy's not asking. I think actually in Ottawa, believe it or not, I was talking to them today. He said, now they're not asking. I said, it's perfect they're not asking. I said, you've already kind of thinking about it. Let's go. Let's do all this little bit of work. It's not a lot of expense involved. And let's put everything together and decide as a board and as the management that how are we going to handle this? And agree that when the time, if that's what you want to do, maybe you don't want to do it proactively, but when the time comes and a resident and an owner comes to me, I will already have the policy done. And we know that in 60 days, we could actually put all the infrastructure in and get everything going. And this actually happens. We have a building on Yonge Street we're just finishing up now that sat on their proposal for over a year. And she called me up one day. She says, we have a resident that's asking. They're in this space. Let's go ahead. Here's your PO. So we're happy to do that. We're happy to plant these seeds and have them be ready for whatever's needed. A lot of this is truly education. It's a little bit of contact information for me. We're not hard to find, so we're here in the Toronto area. You can phone us, email us. We have ways to be reached on our website. And I kind of think that's, about the end. That's the wrap up. I'm not too far off, a couple of minutes early. How did that sound, Tim?
That was awesome, Mark. That's terrific. I can see already we have 17 questions. Some of them are maybe don't need to be answered in this forum. Laura will go through those and sort them. Again, to anybody else who wants to put a question in there, take a look what's already there. Upvote it if you want it near the top, because we probably won't be able to answer every single question in the time remaining. And yeah, so that was awesome.
I'm glad we have questions. That makes me feel better.
I'll jump in just ahead of them. One of the questions earlier on that I responded to in text was about sort of outside of Ontario. We want to keep this. I think most of what you talked about is applicable no matter where, right? We didn't get into we didn't get too much here into regulations and local rules and all that sort of thing.
It's a little different. We're actually, in some ways, in terms of the law that we talked about, we're ahead here in Ontario. And BC, I'm constantly being communicated with. BC is looking for some kind of right to charge arrangement there. That being said, some of the areas in BC already, some of the cities have 100% for new buildings of charging. So it's a little different all across, but ultimately the way that we're going to do it, the way that we're going to accomplish it, is roughly the same everywhere. So the information from that perspective is right. The Condo Act piece that I told you, that is Ontario, not necessarily in the other provinces.
Okay. All right, Laura, would you mind jumping in and taking over here?
Hi, everyone. I was trying to stay focused on Mark's presentation. There's so many interesting questions coming in as well. So I got a bit of a head start, and it looks like these are prioritized here. So let's start with Craig Sweetnam's question. If you could talk to the Ontario government, what could they do to make it easier or better for landlords so that landlords can install charging for tenants? Given that charging installation costs can be a huge expense compared to the cost of electricity, how do landlords get, oh, jumped up because someone else's question popped up. How do landlords get tenants to pay for the installation cost?
So, and I think Laura knows this, apartments are a little bit of a different challenge than condominiums. In condominiums, they're owners and they need to be dealt with and they have a right to have things that they want. That doesn't work that way in apartments. And ultimately, the only thing at the moment that apartments are interested in is keeping their suites occupied. Here certainly in the GTA, occupying suites is not an issue. They don't need some incentive to figure out how to get them occupied. But that being said, the question was about the government, and I think what might very well happen is they may be incentivized to put some of these in, make it a little less expensive for the apartment owner to put some of these in, and there we can have a little bit of an opportunity for the apartment owner to make a bit of a profit off of this, kind of in the way that they make a profit off of washers and dryers. They give them the space to put the washer and dryer in, and they're getting a little bit of an opportunity to make some money off it. So if we keep it not too crazy and we keep the cost reasonable, I think it'll come around. It's just been a little slow on the apartment end of it, but I think that some of them, there was a program just recently that was offering some money, and some of the apartment owners were quite interested in that. So I think you might start to see these popping up. And the reality is, as the cars turn to be more and more electric, and there's still a very small percentage in terms of everything else, and the prices come down a bit. Apartment owners don't always have, they're not buying $100,000 Teslas. So as we start to have reasonable cars and a bit more of a better, lower price range, I think that's all going to come together and work. But I think the government they understand this. I think they're going to work towards having this happen.
Yeah, and I mean, as we've seen in BC, the provincial rebates coupled with the federal rebates helps companies that will subsidize the cost of the hardware, which helps make the upfront cost a lot lower for condos and apartments.
Yep, absolutely. Well, we'll just see how that goes over time, but I think you're going to start to see, just as we've gotten a more reasonable uptake in the condos, I think the apartments will come on soon. They're just a little bit behind everything.
Next question here from Eugene Dunlap. Do you have a standard EV charging policy for condos to give out?
Yeah, if you're engaged with us, we'll give you a blank policy. And that gets you, I find if, nothing harder for me than just seeing a blank screen and having to fill everything out. So if somebody can give me kind of the bones of it and I just have to flesh that out, then it's a lot easier. And we absolutely have that for our clients that we're engaging.
All right, next here from Steve Glover. Our condo is a converted schoolhouse that has 35 suites, no underground parking. There are 70 outdoor assigned parking spots under a sheltered roof, open concept. How would we go about getting charging stations there?
So there's no question that above ground parking is way more challenging. We're talking about civil work, we're talking about concrete bases, but ultimately, to begin with, anything can be done. It's not that it can't be done. You just have to look at the cost. If it cost me $5,000 or $6,000 to put in a condo, I might be okay with that. Maybe the same thing is going to cost $15,000 in the scenario that you talked about. It may be, I haven't seen it yet. I don't know if that's an acceptable amount or not. If it is, ultimately, if it's a condo, they still have a right to be accommodated. So if put together what the idea is going to be, but I understand before you get started with this, that if your goal is to have this all happen for $3,000 or $4,000, and it's clearly that's not going to happen, just set your expectation in your head and decide how you want to move ahead. I had somebody call me just today, just outside of London. They have a very similar situation, but he says, you know what, my suite is just 10 feet in front of my parking space. I think that I could actually trench from there into my building, into my actual suite and get into my panel. Well, that is actually completely reasonable, and that might happen at not a horrendous cost. So each one of these we have to look at differently. Even the condos, Laura and I have been lots of condos. They don't all look the same. Because I say condo doesn't mean a square box rising out of 2x2. They don't all look like that. So we'll look at everyone individually and figure out how best we can help.
Next question from from Sion Jones. If the load management network goes down, what is the safety mechanism to prevent overloading the electrical system?
Right, so this is actually a very important question. Maybe Sion is a ESA inspector, I'm not sure. But we have a default on the chargers. If it goes down, they move down to 8 amps, a very, very low amount. Our goal, of course, would to have this not happen. We're trying to put the system in a very specific manner so that we're not relying on a lot of opportunities for that to happen. But you're right, in terms of safety, they do have to go to this low level. And so they'll just default down to this level. Again, it's not a problem that I don't get calls about this happening. But functionally, it's important that it happen. And we do make that happen. It's important to us. We have to satisfy the Electrical Safety Authority that this is a safe installation.
So it's called a fallback current, right, Mark?
Correct. Default.
Okay, so essentially the chargers default to the minimum amperage.
Correct.
All right, next here from Pavlo Komenko. Will you be commenting on the NRCan programs and their grants?
There was just a set of programs that the NRCan programs are ongoing. They keep coming up with different programs to serve different sectors. So there was just one that closed out a while ago that actually had to do with the multi-res, and we were successful in some of those being accepted. So it'll be ongoing. I also think if you just look at what was happening in the budget the other day, the government is absolutely understanding that we need to get people back to work. This is a very unusual time, and they will be looking for ways to get people back to work and to improve the environment. They see these two things as being very tied together. They have up until now. It's not a new thing, but I think you might find that it's going to start on steroids. And just keep your ear to the ground, and people like me are, if there's something that's good for our customers, the second I hear about it, you'll be the next one.
Yeah, and just to add to that, so the program that Mark was talking about, it was a program targeting multifamily workplace and fleet. Specifically, that one closed in June, and there was about a 3-month delay. The results were supposed to become available in August, and they just became available last week. The next program is targeting public settings, and that one's opening in February. And then there will be another program opening in May, again, targeting multifamily workplace and fleet. That's May 2021. So there's plenty more opportunities. As Mark mentioned, it's on a rolling basis. Next question from Guy Hall. What is the fee above the price of electricity for servicing the personal chargers? Can you provide some examples?
The fees can range. The fee that we typically charge is about $17.50. So that's, it can be in that sort of 15 to 25 range, depending on what backend you're using.
Yeah, and so that's for the level 2 chargers for multifamily settings. For DC fast charging, you'd probably be looking at about double that.
For sure. Again, and even just to the vendors that are doing this back end, like Laura, understand that people, as an example, in condos, sometimes are away. They're living in a condo because they are going to be away for 3 or 4 or 5 months, at least before COVID, they were away. And we can do things like suspend that charge to try to make it easier for them. And we're trying to work with people to try to make it as economical as possible.
There's a great question from Sanjin Zeko. Because multi-unit residential buildings come in so many forms. We have condos, stratas, rental apartment buildings, townhouses. Sanjin's question is there any difference in approach in terms of rental apartment buildings? How can renters request chargers?
First of all, renters are not obviously covered by the Condo Act, so they don't have this opportunity. I mean, at the moment, I don't think it's all that simple. There's no governmental mechanism. But if there was a group, if I was an apartment owner and I had a group of a few people that were interested, well, maybe I would listen to my tenants. Why not speak to the owner and see if you can't come up with some kind of an idea? You might even approach somebody like myself or Laura and see if we can come up with some kind of plan for you that would be appealing to the owner. But it may be hard if it's only one person. Sometimes that's a bit more difficult. But if it looked from the perspective of the owner that there were a number of people that lived in the building that wanted this, that could be a way to go about it. What do you think, Laura?
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I mean, I think you have to think about the motivation. So in a condo building, or in any multi-unit residential building, one of the motivations is to provide this as an amenity. But in a condo, you have the added value that these are personal parking spots owned by residents, and they add value by adding charging to the parking spot. You do add value in rental buildings, but it's just not as direct to those individual residents. So I think for a rental building, you want to approach it more in terms of it being an amenity that will attract new residents as a shared common amenity. We have a question that's a bit off topic. Mark, could you speak about bidirectional charging? Not many cars today with such capability, but it's definitely going to be common in EVs in the coming decade. How do you think the infrastructure will change? This is from Mayank.
Yeah, it's all very interesting. Our Nissan Leaf actually could do bidirectional charging if something was available. The chargers for bidirectional are just now starting to become available. From my perspective, it's going to be very interesting. The bidirectional is kind of two things. Bidirectional is putting the energy back. That's part's obvious, maybe obvious in the wording. But the other thing that happens with bidirectional is you have communication. So where I at the moment cannot tell the situation with the battery in a car, I can't tell the difference between a car that needs 10% or needs 50% of battery. If I had communication with that car through the bidirectional meter, and we're really a little out there, it hasn't really happened yet. But if you can imagine it, that might help me to prioritize where I was going to send this energy through our system to try to help those that need it more than others. At the moment, we don't quite have that, but it's a possibility. And in terms of how it's going to be part of a whole energy ecosystem, the idea that we're putting batteries into homes. The battery in my car is way bigger than the Powerwall that I have in my home. And maybe that could be something that could be part of a grid going forward, where somebody will either buy part of my battery, I could use part of it to power my home, or I could give, that could be a place when once we have the communication in place, that the utility might drop some energy in when they need to at a particular time of day or night. We're just a little out from that, but it's just absolutely a high level question, and interesting, and we will start to see this happening in the not too distant future.
Okay, Laura and Mark, I think we're sort of getting close to the finish line here. First, I would of course like to thank you, Mark. That was really, really terrific. A lot of information packed in there. And I think you did it in a way that even a non-techie like me could grasp what the challenges are, and what more importantly, what some of the solutions are. And we also had kind of a extra bonus, kind of a tag team here with Laura Bryson from Switch Energy, being a member of EV Society and taking the Q&A. So she was a good complement to Mark's presentation. So thank you both for doing that.
You're welcome. Thanks for having us.
So we hope that you're going to return, everybody, to the next Canada Talks Electric Cars webinar. We're going to be meeting again first Tuesday. It'll be January the 5th, when we will welcome none other than Kara Clareman. And she's president and CEO of Plug and Drive, and that massively successful electric vehicle discovery center. She has some pretty cool insights from consumers and a pulse on what's happening, I think, a little bit on the regulatory side. So she's going to be we're really lucky to have her come in and speak to us in January. So increasing public awareness and understanding of electric vehicles is key to widespread adoption. And we sure hope that you found today's webinar informative, and it's going to help again as we carry on with our conversations with non-EV owners and help bring them along to electric mobility. All of us at the Electric Vehicle Society wish you and yours a safe and happy holiday season. And of course, we look forward to spending time with you again in 2021. Thanks, everybody. And this concludes today's webinar.